Welcome. If you ever imagined how it would be like to be a student at Hogwarts, trying to sleep in your common room at night, filled with cozy magic and gentle wonder, you're in the right place. Subscribe to return here anytime for peaceful stories from the castle corridors and beyond. Now, let's begin.
Somewhere in the upper floors of Hogwarts, rain was whispering against tall, ancient windows. It had started earlier in the evening, slow and steady, a gentle pattering that filled the corridors with a sense of hush and stillness. Outside, the forbidden forest lay quiet, beneath a dark curtain of clouds, and even the wind, usually eager to whistle through cracks in the castle walls, had fallen into a kind of reverent silence. Down in the heart of the castle, beneath layers of stone and shadow, you wandered through a hallway few students visited. The flagstones beneath your slippers were cool and slightly uneven, worn smooth by time. Golden sconces cast soft light along the walls, each flame flickering inside its glass casing like it was caught in the middle of a drowsy yawn. There was no one else about. Only the creak of old beams above you, and the occasional muffled groan of the castle settling into sleep. You weren't meant to be out this late, of course, but sometimes, especially on nights like this, sleep just refused to come. Your bed had felt too quiet, the dormitory too still. Something about the hush of the castle called to you instead, and so you followed it, wandering softly, with careful steps and curious eyes. You turned a corner you didn't quite remember noticing before. There, lit by a single, swaying lantern, hung a peculiar portrait. A still life of a silver fruit bowl filled with shining grapes, a few figs, and a particularly plump pear with a mischievous glint in its eye. You slowed your steps. Something about the painting made you pause. The pear almost seemed to smile. Tentatively, you reached out and gave it a gentle tickle with your fingertip. The pear gave a sudden giggle, yes, a real giggle, and began to squirm in the bowl. Then, with a quiet click, it transformed into a small brass doorknob. Before you could quite believe what you'd seen, the wall swung inward, revealing a passageway. Warmth hit you first. Not just the comforting kind that made your skin feel cozy, but a deeper kind. The kind of warmth you felt walking into a room where someone had been expecting you. Soft yellow light poured from the corridor beyond, carrying with it the unmistakable aroma of baked bread, cinnamon, roasted nuts, and melted butter. Your stomach gave a hopeful flutter. You stepped forward without thinking. The stone beneath your feet gave way to tile, polished and slightly warm, as though the floors themselves had been waiting to welcome you. The corridor curved gently, its walls adorned with gleaming copper pans and enchanted ladles that stirred themselves slowly in mid-air. Far ahead, the light grew stronger, and you began to hear gentle sounds, the clink of teacups being stacked, the sigh of bread rising in ovens, the faint hum of someone singing in a key only meant for comfort. Then, like walking through the final page of a picture book, you stepped into the Hogwarts kitchens. It was vast, far larger than you expected. The ceiling arched high above you, supported by thick wooden beams, wrapped in creeping ivy that looked far too alive to be ornamental. Lanterns floated lazily just beneath the rafters, their light soft and golden, casting a warm glow across long wooden tables and counters stacked with pastries, stews, and mugs of cooling cocoa. Dozens of house-elves moved gently through the space, not in a rush or flurry, but with the steady rhythm of those who knew their tasks by heart. They wore spotless linen aprons tied snugly around their waists, and their soft slippers made no sound on the floors as they worked. One elf was humming quietly to a pumpkin that sat, plump and obedient, in a mixing bowl. Another was brushing melted butter across a tray of scones with a conjured feather. They didn't startle when you entered, though you were sure they had noticed. One or two gave you a quick glance, and a few smiled with their large, kind eyes. But no one scolded you or asked why you were out of bed. It was as though your presence, unexpected as it might be, was gently accepted, folded into the night like a spoon into batter. Then one of them approached. She was small, even by house-elf standards, with oversized ears that drooped sweetly at the tips, and a patchwork apron stitched from bits of old Gryffindor and Hufflepuff robes. Her eyes were mossy green and bright, and when she spoke, her voice was like a warm pot of tea, soft, rising in friendly steam. "Couldn't sleep, dear?" she asked gently, not accusing, just understanding. You nodded, still half caught in the dreamlike glow of the kitchen. "Well then," she said, clapping her hands softly, "come sit by the hearth. It's warm, and I've just taken the apple buns out. You'll feel better with something sweet." You followed her across the room, weaving between house-elves quietly folding linens, stirring sauces, and chopping enchanted herbs that arranged themselves in neat little piles. The air smelled of cloves and honey, and the faint, earthy scent of fresh herbs hanging in bundles from the ceiling. At the far end of the kitchen was a great brick hearth, wide enough for 3 cauldrons to sit side by side inside it. A merry fire crackled within, casting golden shadows along the stone walls and flickering over old iron kettles and copper teapots. In front of it, someone had laid a plump armchair draped in a cozy, worn tartan blanket. It looked like it had been waiting just for you. You sank into it gratefully. The warmth curled around you at once, comforting and old, like the embrace of a favorite sweater, or the scent of a familiar cupboard. The house-elf reappeared a moment later with a steaming mug of cocoa, its surface swirling with soft blue wisps of enchanted whipped cream, and a small plate with 2 freshly baked apple buns, dusted in sugar. You murmured your thanks, and she gave a pleased nod. "We'll keep things quiet," she said kindly. "You just rest." As she padded off to rejoin her fellows, you leaned back and let your eyes wander across the room. The house-elves moved like dancers, each one tuned to the rhythm of the others. One placed spoons into drawers that closed themselves with soft clicks. Another levitated a dish towel to gently polish a floating teapot. Somewhere near the far wall, a group of elves was whispering jokes to one another over a tray of tiny treacle tarts, giggling quietly, as though trying not to wake a sleeping house. It was like watching the dream of a kitchen, the one kitchens aspired to be. Efficient? Yes, but more than that. Full of care, of memory, of home. You took a bite of the apple bun. It was warm and soft, with hints of cinnamon and something almost lemony, bright and gentle at once. The cocoa tasted like melted starlight and sleep. The fire crackled again, louder this time, and you let your eyes half close, lulled by the sounds around you. The gentle creak of wooden beams, the soft hiss of something simmering, the rhythm of knife against cutting board, all of it a lullaby in disguise. As the warmth of the fire curled deeper into your chest, you watched the little kitchen world continue its gentle dance. Nothing rushed, nothing loud, just peace and quiet purpose, and the feeling that, here beneath the castle, something was always keeping watch, something kind and warm and very, very old. You didn't know it yet, but the night had only just begun. The fire cast long golden shapes that swayed softly across the stone floor. Every so often, one of the logs shifted with a small sigh, releasing a quiet crackle of sparks. You were nestled deep into the armchair now, the tartan blanket pulled gently up to your chin, your cocoa cradled in your hands, still faintly warm and impossibly comforting. All around you, the great Hogwarts kitchen moved in slow, practiced harmony. There was a calm to this space, a special kind of magic, not born of wands or incantations, but of years, centuries, of quiet, invisible care. The way a spoon was placed just so on a counter. The way the hearth maintained the perfect warmth without needing adjustment. The way the enchanted brooms swept quietly in the corners without needing to be asked. The House-Elves, small as they were, moved with a grace that was nearly soundless. They padded across the tile in slippers stitched from leftover bits of student robes and tea towels, each one perfectly shaped for the feet they served. Their hands were small but quick, nimble with skill and memory. It wasn't rushed work, it was gentle work, patient, even joyful. One elf worked beside the open ovens, gently brushing melted butter over a tray of warm soda bread. The bread puffed contentedly, the crusts cracking with soft sighs. Another elf passed by with a floating tray of stacked bowls, humming to herself, in a voice that was no louder than the whirring of a sleepy clock. You watched as she whispered to the tray, and it slowly descended into an empty cupboard, sliding in with a perfect fit and a soft click. It was a world tucked away from the eyes of most, and tonight it felt like it had opened just for you. The elf who had first greeted you returned, carrying a new pot of cocoa. Steam curled upward in lazy spirals, catching the flicker of lantern light. She poured more into your mug without a word, then gently placed the pot on a nearby tray and looked at you with a small, proud smile. Her name, she finally said after a moment, was Mimba. You introduced yourself in return, your voice hushed, softened by the space. She nodded once, kindly, and then, instead of walking away, she settled herself on a low stool near your chair. Her apron was slightly flour-dusted, and one ear had a tiny golden thimble looped over the tip like jewelry. "It is a quiet night," she said thoughtfully. "The best kind, I think. Not too much to do, just enough to feel useful." You nodded, not wanting to disturb the hush with too many words. The air in the kitchen seemed to welcome silence. Good silence, the kind that holds warmth rather than waiting. Mimba rested her hands in her lap and looked around the kitchen, eyes scanning her fellow elves as they worked. "Some nights," she said after a moment, "we make things just to make them. Biscuits no one will eat, extra bread to leave in the corners for the mice, even a cake or two for practice or memory. It's nice, you see, to keep moving, to remember the taste of things that mean joy." You sipped your cocoa, watching her with growing fondness. Mimba leaned slightly toward you, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some say this kitchen remembers too, that the walls know the hands that have stirred pots and rolled dough. We think that's true, especially on nights like these, You feel it, don't you? You nodded slowly. You did. Mimba stood again, dusted her apron lightly, and gave you a soft look of invitation. Would you like to walk a bit? She asked. You don't have to, but we've only just finished the fruit sorting, and it's rather nice to see what's been growing in the enchanted orchard this week. Curious and comforted, you rose from the chair and stretched gently beneath the blanket. The heat from the fire had settled into your limbs, loosening everything that had been tight or tired before. The kitchen's warmth followed you as Mimba led you across the flagstone floor and deeper into the room. She took you behind one of the larger counters, so tall it nearly blocked your view, and down a short side passage that opened into a smaller, adjacent room. Here, the light was dimmer, more golden than yellow, and there were baskets stacked high with fruits and vegetables. Some familiar, and others not quite. One basket held shiny apples that sparkled slightly under the light, as though lightly dusted with frost. Another was filled with soft orange pears that gave off a calming scent like chamomile and cedarwood. There were tiny plums that floated a few inches above their basket, lazily spinning in mid-air, and fat strawberries that whispered a soft lullaby when Mimba brushed her hand past them. The orchard adjusts itself to the seasons, she explained softly, and to the mood of the castle. After a particularly difficult week, we usually find soothing fruits. Things with warmth, things with sleepiness in them. She offered you a small, purple plum. You took it gently. It was cool and soft, and when you took a small bite, the flavor bloomed instantly, sweet and deep, like honey with a memory folded into it. It melted away like a dream you barely remembered having. I like that one, Mimba said, watching your expression. Those grow after exams, or after a long winter. You walked together through the sorting room, past racks of spices and bundles of dried herbs tied with ribbon. A chalkboard near the doorway listed the week's meals in soft, swirly handwriting. Tuesday breakfast, porridge with brown sugar, charmed toast, plum jam. Tuesday supper, roasted squash with nutmeg and sage, treacle tart, custard tea. It made you smile, knowing the quiet care that went into every bite served above in the great hall. All of it planned and prepared down here, by small hands, big hearts, and magic older than most would guess. Mimba guided you back into the main kitchen, where the pace had slowed even further. Some of the elves had finished for the night, and were sitting together on cushions near the back, sipping tiny mugs of warm milk and chatting in low tones. A few others were still tidying, one elf guiding a trail of soapy bubbles as they danced up and into a sink, another rolling clean dishcloths into perfect little bundles. You were led back to your cozy seat, the fire now low and golden, casting flickering shadows across the stone floor. Another blanket had been draped over the arm of the chair, this one patchworked with faded crests from all 4 houses, lovingly stitched together like a memory. You sank into the chair again, sleep starting to wrap around the edges of your awareness, like warm fog. Mimba tucked the blanket around you with a careful touch, and placed a fresh apple bun on a small napkin beside your cup. "We don't get many visitors," she said, not sounding sad, just thoughtful. "But it's nice when someone sees what we do, what we've always done." You nodded, the words catching softly in your throat. Your eyes were heavy now, and the scent of the kitchen, the cinnamon, the clove, the low burn of the hearth lulled you further still. Mimba gave a small bow and returned to her stool, sipping from her mug, watching the fire as the other elves settled in around her. Outside the kitchen's hidden walls, the castle slept on. But here, in the quiet hum of warmth and care, you were more than welcome. You were home. The hours passed in a way that didn't feel like passing at all, more like a quiet floating, as though time itself had curled up on a nearby cushion and fallen asleep. The kitchen's warmth remained steady, cradling you in soft light and deeper quiet. Your eyes were still heavy, though you hadn't quite given in to sleep. Something about the place invited wakefulness without restlessness, a space where you didn't need to be doing anything to feel held. By now, most of the kitchen work had slowed to a near stop. The last of the dishes had been dried and stacked. The enchanted ladles had retired to their wall hooks with content little spins. Even the magical brooms had swept themselves into the far corner and leaned against the stone, as though preparing for their own well-earned nap. And that's when you noticed it. The shift. The House-Elves were gathering, not bustling, not tidying, just settling in. A few had moved the smaller tables into a circular shape near the hearth, pushing chairs together and laying out cushions. Someone lit a dozen floating candles above them, each one soft white with flickering lavender blue flames that gave off a gentle scent like warm linen and old honey. Mimba returned, carrying a polished teapot shaped like a curled-up kneesel, steam curling from its spout in slow, sleepy ribbons. She poured tea into tiny, mismatched cups, some chipped at the rim, some painted with fading flowers or smiling toads. There were no saucers, no sugar spoons, nothing precise. And yet, it was all perfectly right. When you shifted in your chair to watch more closely, Mimba noticed. "You're welcome to come nearer, if you like," she said. "We share stories most nights, after the work is done. It helps us rest." You hesitated, then nodded. Something about her voice, so kind, so unassuming, made the invitation feel like something much older than words, like you were being welcomed into something ancient and important, but also cozy. Familiar, like a bedtime story told to you under the same blanket, night after night. You padded over slowly, still wrapped in your patchwork quilt, and settled cross-legged on a cushion beside Mimba. The stone beneath you was warm. Someone handed you a tiny cup of tea, no questions, no ceremony, just an offering, gently made and gently received. The tea was warm, floral, and barely sweet, a flavor like chamomile and something older, something that made your shoulders sink lower without you realizing it. The candles hovered just above the group, their light softening the lines in the stone walls and casting the elves' faces in gentle gold. They didn't speak at first, just sipped, rested. The moment didn't ask to be filled. Then, one elf, older, with silvery whiskers curling from his ears and a dark red apron stitched with moons and mushrooms, cleared his throat quietly. "This one," he began, his voice as creaky and smooth as polished wood, "is about the time the castle played a joke on the pickles." You blinked. Mimba smiled. "It was the start of spring," the old elf continued. "The students were away for the Easter holiday, and the castle was bored. It happens now and again. When the children are gone, and the rooms go quiet, the stones themselves get itchy. So the castle, it played. A few elves giggled softly. "Well, it started in the pantry," he said. "We had just enchanted the pickled onions to jar themselves for storage. A good system, really. Each one hops in when it's ready, pop, lid seals, and it's done. But that day, the castle decided the lids should all unscrew themselves and roll away." More giggles now. "We chased rolling jar lids through half the kitchen and into the broom closet. Every time we got close, the jars burped at us and hopped off the shelves. Even you couldn't help smiling. We finally tricked the castle by singing it a lullaby. It likes music, you know. And only then did the lids stop rolling long enough for us to seal them again." He took a long, satisfied sip of his tea, clearly proud. "The pickles were sour about it for days," he added, nodding solemnly. There was a soft wave of laughter around the circle. Nothing loud, just a breathy, sparkling warmth that rolled like steam off the fire. Another elf, this one younger and wearing 2 socks that didn't match, one striped like a badger's tail, the other knitted from soft lavender yarn, raised her hand hesitantly. "I know one," she said. "Not funny, really. Just quiet. My mum told it to me." Everyone turned toward her gently. No rush, no expectation. "It's about the candle that never goes out," she said, looking down into her cup. "There's one in the back corridor behind the statue of the sleeping dragon, down past the tapestry with the flying sheep. It's been burning for hundreds of years." A pause. "They say it was lit by Helga Hufflepuff herself for the House-Elves, so they would always have a little light, even in the darkest part of the castle. It never needs wax, it never flickers, just burns, steady." Another pause. Her voice softened further. "They say it only goes out when the castle is truly empty, and no one knows what that would feel like." The circle was still for a long moment, not in sadness, but in something quieter, something like reverence. Your eyes drifted to the fire, now glowing in its late-night golds and oranges, and imagined the little candle burning in the hidden corridor, steadfast, hidden, loyal. Mimba leaned close and whispered, "We check on it sometimes, just to make sure." You nodded, but said nothing. The tea had warmed your hands and your middle. Your shoulders had fully relaxed. The fire cracked softly. A third elf began to hum, a low, gentle tune that felt like waves on a lake. Others joined in softly, no words, just sounds. The tune was not familiar to you, but it felt like it had always existed, like it had been waiting to find you. You let your head rest against the cushion behind you. The ceiling above the hearth rose high, with wooden beams that curved like the ribs of a ship. In the warm flicker of candlelight, they looked almost like branches, stretching upward into shadow. A small enchanted pastry floated by, a little sugar moon with golden crust, before gently dropping into a plate near the tea tray. The kitchen was still alive, still aware, but nothing hurried, nothing asked. Another story was told, this one about a ghost who used to sneak into the kitchen at night, looking for jam. Then another, about a teapot that could predict the weather if you listened closely to its whistle. Each tale was offered like a gift, and each was met with warmth, or smiles, or the kind of soft sigh that comes just before sleep. You weren't sure how long you sat there, wrapped in that circle of candlelight and cocoa. But eventually, Mimba reached for your cup with her small hands and smiled. "Best not to drift off on the stone," she said gently. "Your cot is nearly ready." You blinked, and the room returned, still glowing, still gentle. You stood slowly, limbs now heavy in the best way. Sleep tugged at your eyes with soft, insistent fingers. You followed her once more across the kitchen, past the tables now wiped clean and the pans hung in neat rows. The hearth still crackled behind you, a steady heartbeat in the quiet. And as you walked, you thought about the stories, floating softly in the air now, like steam from the teapot. Stories of pickles and candles and ghosts and jam, simple things, true things, the kind that stay with you long after the fire dies down. The walk back across the kitchen felt different now, slower, quieter, though no less warm. The stories had settled like dust in the air, soft, floating, glimmering with memory. You were filled with a deep, pleasant tiredness, not the kind that overwhelms or drags you down, but the kind that folds you inward, like a blanket. The kind that lets you know you're exactly where you're meant to be. The fire behind you was still gently burning, though its tallest flames had softened into embers and slow dancing golds. The circle of elves had gradually dispersed. Some returned to their little nooks to tidy this or that, and others simply stretched out on nearby cushions, heads resting on folded aprons, hands tucked beneath cheeks like children after a long day of play. Mimba walked beside you, her small steps careful and quiet. She didn't say much. There was no need. The kitchen's language had shifted entirely now. No more clinking pots or hissing kettles. Just the occasional creak of old floorboards, the whisper of slippers brushing stone, and the comforting hush of a room settling into sleep. Near the back of the kitchen, tucked into an alcove framed by thick stone archways and trailing ivy, was a small cot that hadn't been there earlier. You weren't sure when it had appeared, perhaps conjured, or perhaps just hidden, until the moment it was needed. It was low to the ground, nestled near the base of the wall, where the warmth from the ovens still lingered faintly in the stone. The cot was perfect. Not fancy, not grand, but perfect. It had been made up with obvious care. A soft mattress with a patchwork quilt sewn from old house robes and worn bits of tapestry, faded with age but full of quiet magic. The edges had been stitched with tiny runes and stars, and the pillow, plump and cool, smelled faintly of fresh linen and something comforting you couldn't quite place. Maybe parchment, maybe wood polish, maybe something older still. Mimba motioned gently to it, then looked up at you with her wide, moss-coloured eyes. "It's yours for the night," she said softly. "The castle won't mind, and neither will we." You stepped toward it, feeling that odd sense of shyness one sometimes feels when offered great kindness. You touched the edge of the quilt with your fingers. It was soft and just slightly warm, as if it had been sitting in the sun, though there had been no sun in the kitchen all night. You sat on the edge of the cot and looked around. The kitchen was now glowing, with only a few floating candles, most of them hovering near the ceiling like lazy fireflies. One or two house-elves still moved quietly at the far end, stacking ingredients for tomorrow's breakfast, or whispering to shelves that arranged themselves with sleepy groans. Mimba stood beside you, hands folded in front of her. She didn't rush you. She didn't speak again. She only waited until you pulled the quilt over your legs and shifted down into the bed, your body sinking into the mattress like a boat into calm waters. She stepped forward, pulled the blanket gently up to your shoulders, and tucked the edges with practiced, careful hands. "There," she said, "snug." You smiled without fully meaning to. Your eyelids had already begun to drift lower. "We'll be here," she added, "all night, just in case." You nodded once, eyes closing. "Thank you," you murmured, barely above a breath. She gave a small bow and turned away, leaving you with the soft sounds of her footsteps retreating into the quiet. For a long moment, you simply lay there, breathing. Above you, the stone arches curved into shadow. Somewhere to your right, a kettle let out a tiny sigh. To your left, a wooden spoon stirred gently in a bowl, then stilled itself with a polite clink. The castle above was utterly silent, wrapped in its own kind of sleep, its staircases resting, portraits dozing in their frames, ghosts gliding in slow loops through ancient hallways. But down here, in the warm belly of the school, there was still life. Quiet, careful life. From the cot, you could see the outline of a cupboard door opening gently. A tiny pair of hands reached out, pulling a blanket inside. Another cupboard opened nearby, revealing a pile of quilts, a lantern dimming itself with a flicker, and the quiet thump of a small slipper falling to the floor. The house-elves were going to bed. One by one, they slipped into their cupboards, drawers, or tiny hammocks that hung between shelves. Some curled up in linen closets, some behind spice racks, others in shadowed corners where old rugs had been laid just for them. It was like watching a tiny village fold itself into sleep. The last candle drifted down and settled in a tall lantern near the hearth. It pulsed once, like a sigh, then dimmed to a low amber glow. Everything was soft. Everything was still. And then the hum. It started low, so low you almost didn't notice. A vibration in the walls, not quite a sound, more a feeling, like the castle itself had exhaled. You'd felt it before, in the common room, in the library, even in the astronomy tower when the wind was right. That quiet pulse beneath the stone, a rhythm, a heartbeat. Tonight, it felt stronger, or maybe just more noticeable. You were closer now, beneath everything, and the castle was, too, closer to you, as if it were listening, or watching, or resting beside you. One of the elves hummed softly from somewhere nearby, a lullaby just like before, only this time no one joined in. It was a song meant to end the night, not to share, but to let go. You turned onto your side, nestling deeper beneath the quilt. The texture of the fabric was worn, but comforting, like something passed down, never spoken of, but always there when you needed it. You thought of the stories, of pickles and haunted teapots, of candles that never went out, of laughter told in whispers, of magic made with hands instead of wands. The castle above may have been built with spells, but it was kept alive by this. By warmth, by care, by tiny hands folding sheets, baking bread, brewing tea, and tucking in sleepy students who had wandered too far and stayed up too late. It occurred to you that perhaps Hogwarts had always been alive, not because of enchantments or wards or charms, but because of love. Quiet, constant love poured into every meal, every hallway, every corner of the kitchen where laughter and lullabies still echoed softly against the stone. The room faded around you, not all at once, but gently. The golden light of the lantern, the distant creak of a cupboard, the hush of the fire dying into glowing coals, all of it blurred, like the memory of a dream you hadn't had yet. Your breath slowed, your muscles melted. The castle held you, and at last you slept. Time slipped away in that soft, golden kitchen. Hours, minutes, whatever measure had once been ticking along in your mind had long since dissolved into warmth and quiet. Sleep had taken you like a slow tide, wrapping around your limbs and pulling you gently into a dream you could no longer remember but didn't want to leave. Somewhere in the haze between dreaming and waking, the faintest sound stirred your ears. A gentle creak, like the hinge of an old cupboard door, and the soft shuffling of slippered feet on warm tile. You didn't open your eyes, not fully. There was no need. You were safe. Your breathing stayed even, your limbs heavy and loose beneath the patchwork quilt. But part of you, quiet and still, drifted just close enough to the surface to feel the kitchen again. The scent of the place lingered, faint cinnamon, cooling stone, the whisper of peppermint from a cracked cookie somewhere nearby. The fire had faded to embers now, its warmth radiating gently, as though it still remembered its brightest hours, and didn't quite want to let go. One small house-elf was awake. You could sense her. Mimba, perhaps, or someone else just as gentle. She padded softly across the floor, checking on the last few bits of the evening's work. A dishcloth was folded and placed just so. A pot was nudged into alignment with its twin. A stool was scooted back into place, quietly as a cat. Then a pause. The elf stood near your cot for a long moment, not touching, not speaking, just watching, making sure. Her presence was as light as a breath, but it wrapped around you like another layer of the quilt. A final blessing on a night already full of them. She adjusted the corner of the blanket near your foot, and then moved on. All around the room the hush had deepened. Even the enchanted spoons and brooms seemed to have fallen into slumber, their soft magical hum dimmed to the faintest note. Somewhere nearby, a kettle shifted in its sleep, letting out a quiet puff of steam. A floating candle above flickered once, then gently blinked itself out, like an eye that had grown too tired to stay open. Above you, the kitchen arches loomed like the arms of a great sleeping tree, holding everything in stillness. You imagined the castle above, still and dreaming, its long halls dark, portraits asleep in their frames, ghosts gently drifting in slow circles. The staircases had stopped their shifting. The windows no longer blinked with moonlight. Even Peeves, you imagined, had tucked himself into some invisible crack in the wall and dozed off, trickless and still. And beneath it all, beneath the weight of the great stone castle and the years stacked high upon its towers, this kitchen remained, a warm heart at the center of it all. The House-Elves had all gone to sleep. You could feel it, not see it, but feel it, like the soft pull of a tide receding, each of them in their little beds, tucked into cupboards, curled into hammocks, nestled beneath old baking tables, wrapped in linen blankets, breathing in unison, a quiet chorus of care and comfort. And you were part of it now. The air was full of it, rest. Not just the kind that comes after work, but the deep, honest rest that only happens in places that feel like home. The kind of sleep that sinks into your bones and tells you that everything for this moment is okay. You let yourself drift further. In your mind, the kitchen blurred into memory. You remembered the shimmer of the enchanted fruit bowl, the sound of Mimba's voice, the stories by candlelight, and the laughter that danced like sugar in the air. You remembered the taste of warm apple buns and the feel of the quilt tucked up to your chin. You remembered how the stone floor had felt beneath your slippers, cool, solid, grounding. And more than anything, you remembered how you'd felt welcomed. Not because of who you were, not because of what house you belonged to, not because of any wand or lineage or mark on your record. Just you, walking quietly into a hidden space and being accepted with warmth, with care, with tea and firelight. It was a kind of magic you hadn't known the castle held. And maybe, just maybe, this was one of its oldest enchantments. The Hogwarts kitchens had always been there, from the first brick to the last pie crust. While students had come and gone, laughed and cried, triumphed and failed, this place had remained, constant, comforting, kind. The stories whispered over tea, the lullabies sung without words, the meals prepared for children too tired to notice the hands that made them. It was a magic of quiet service, of devotion, of love in a language that didn't need spelling. You felt it now more than ever. It settled into you like warmth from the hearth, and you knew, without being told, that this night would live with you for a very long time. It would become one of those memories that surfaced only in the softest moments, perhaps years from now, on a rainy night, when the wind tapped at your window and the scent of cinnamon crept through the halls of your own home. Then, just as your thoughts began to scatter like leaves across a quiet forest floor, you felt something else. The kitchen was changing, not in a grand way, not like the castle's staircases or vanishing rooms, but in the smallest, softest way. The way the temperature dropped half a degree, the way the shadows moved just slightly, the way the silence deepened and turned inward. Morning wasn't here yet, not quite. But the castle knew, and the kitchen knew, the change was coming. Outside the walls, the first stirrings of pre-dawn were beginning. Not light, not yet, but the subtle winding up of the world. An owl cooed somewhere near the owlery, a breeze whispered past high-shuttered windows, and far above, in the upper floors, the dream murmurs of sleeping students shifted beneath their covers. But down here, there was still time, still space, still quiet. The last floating candle dimmed itself with a final flicker. The hearth let out a long, gentle breath and settled into a slow burn. Your cot seemed to sink even further into the floor, grounding you as your breathing slowed again. You were more asleep than awake now. Thoughts were no longer thoughts, but drifting images. The giggling pear painting, the whispering strawberries, a warm voice telling a story about enchanted pickles, the sound of a spoon resting itself gently in a cup. You felt dimly the sensation of something small and warm being tucked beside your pillow. A folded handkerchief, perhaps, with stitched initials. You might not even find it in the morning. But you would know it had been left there, and that it meant something. The final sounds faded. The world, at last, went still. You breathed. The castle breathed. And the kitchen, the quiet heart of it all, held you gently, like a story softly ending itself before the dream began.